Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and before that, earlier this year, the clumsy withdrawal by the Americans from Afghanistan has led to, it would seem, a set of global earthquakes, creating perhaps a new world order. As the war rages on in Ukraine, India, of course, has opted for a series of abstentions, refusing to condemn Vladimir Putin outright at the United Nations. In the meantime, questions are being raised about the future of the Quad and where the United States of America stands in this new world order. In the midst of it all, the war, of course, has had a devastating consequence already on the global economy, especially the price of crude. But the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and UAE, are thus far not really cooperating on increasing oil production to help stave off these increasing prices. Against this backdrop, as chatter increases around a possible new world order and new hierarchies, veteran diplomat Talmiz Ahmad has a new book out called West Asia at War. The diplomat is on the program with us. He's, of course, been somebody who has spent decades of his life developing an expertise in West Asia, known in the West as the Middle East. Welcome to the program, sir. And thank you so much. And as I said, your book, of course, looks at West Asia at war, but the ripple effects of not just what's happening in West Asia, but globally today is something that could take us years to understand. So let me start by asking you what's top on the mind for most Indians. How much petrol and diesel are now costing, how much more they're costing. The rise in global oil prices is something that every country is grappling with. But the Gulf countries have not really stepped up to help the West, even in some cases ignoring Joe Biden's calls. How do you see this response in the backdrop of the Ukraine war, in particular Saudi Arabia?
You have to step back a bit and see why the United States has taken Russia on. The United States, for many sections of the American establishment, the Cold War never ended. They are still in a state of conflict with Russia. And hence they have been steadily expanding NATO. And it is relentless. Now, for various reasons, which I will elaborate shortly, the Americans have decided that they now have to crush Russia economically and politically and end it as a challenge to their world order. What they have been seeing for some time is China and Russia coming together quite strongly, quite robustly, expanding their influence across large parts of Eurasia. And this has alarmed the United States. The United States wants to be the leader of the hegemonic world, hegemonic leader of the world. Now, as part of this crushing of the Russian economy, the Americans have now initiated sanctions on their energy supplies. No consultations insofar as the Europeans are concerned, no consultations as far as West Asian producers are concerned. Therefore, the Europeans are terrified. The Europeans get most of their energy from Russia, both in terms of oil and gas, as also they get many other items from Russia. It's a crucial dependence. And if the Americans had consulted the West Asian producers, they could have coordinated a certain increase in supply. But the Americans have been treating the West Asian producers very badly. They have been abusing. They have been abusing Saudi Arabia as a pariah, and Biden has said in a very childish manner, "I will not talk to the Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman." And this is not the way you build relations. Now you desperately need these people on your side. You want them to increase production, and they want to ask why. You were not with us when we needed you. You've treated us badly. You have been extremely non-cooperative and non-communicative with us, and therefore they don't even want to take his call. Can you
I know.
imagine a situation?
I read that Joe Biden's calls were ducked by both Saudi Arabia and the UAE leaders, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. How do you see this, therefore, going from here? How do you see this playing out? India, for example, has of course continued to opt for buying oil from Russian companies. There have been protestations around that decision, but the cost of oil impacts us all. So, given that the Saudis are not even taking the American president's call, what do you think might happen
You
next?
see, cost of oil is connected with global geopolitics. And
Yeah.
anything that it is a very sensitive commodity as far as geopolitics is concerned. So American sanctions on Iran and Venezuela, and then the conflictual scenarios in different places, sanctions on Russia, all of these have impacted on global oil prices. So there's no single cause, but you could see that the American role is central to this situation. Americans are complacent because they produce enough oil and gas for their needs, but they are totally insensitive as far as their European partners are concerned and where their West Asian friends are concerned. They are now wanting to crush Russia economically. That's their agenda, and that's what they want to do. My own sense is, and that's what everyone else is paying a very heavy price as far as this is concerned, literally and figuratively. And therefore, India also finds itself in a bind. Oil
Mm.
prices have been going up for some time as global tensions have risen. And now, obviously, once the war started and the sanctions were announced, this is going to get much worse. As
Mm.
far as supplies are concerned, we still have those. I mean, the supplies from West Asia are still coming on to India, but the prices are obviously extremely high. I
So
blame the American agenda here very obviously.
you have used the word childish for the American president. You believe the American president has been childish in his dealings with Saudi Arabia and the
He, he,
UAE?
he has had a disastrous presidency. And I would now use the word insipid and shaky in terms of every policy announced.
I,
The
I,
guy
I, I'm,
is
I'm just, I'm just laughing because you use the word shaky because that's the word he used for India's response on Russia.
well, I was being a little naughty there. This man has had a disastrous presidency. He had a
Hmm.
very ambitious domestic agenda. None of that has gone through because his own party is opposed to it. One senator can hold the entire country to ransom. Look at the disaster of Afghanistan. He
Yeah.
looks like a full-time disaster zone. He looks, he looks absolutely a lame duck. And there are concerns that in November he will truly become a lame duck electorally. He just needs to lose a few seats in the Senate and he's finished. 2 years
Yeah.
of forthcoming disaster. Now, that is why my own sense is that besides the Cold War against the Russians, there is a very solid domestic agenda right here. And that is to make Biden look like a leader, the leader of the Western world, going forward and now taking on the ugly Russian, taking on Putin. That's what he is now trying to project himself.
Okay.
He
I,
wants to get back some electoral support from the right and also rally his own party around him.
a lot to unpack in those strong words there. Let's briefly refer back to your book, West Asia at War. If we can bring up that cover, do pick up Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad's book. Now, in this book, you actually have a chapter, sir, on the Biden presidency. And you talk about his approach to foreign policy, which today you're calling as a full time disaster zone. Afghanistan, of course, has been his second big disaster in terms of how the withdrawal took place. You also speak very intriguingly about how, when the Americans and the Saudis at one point joined hands when the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan, there was a kind of Osama bin Laden and an international jihadist core that came out as a byproduct. How do you see Joe Biden's handling of Afghanistan? Has that been more disastrous than how he's responded
You
to the
see,
Russian crisis?
as far as withdrawal from Russia, as far as withdrawal from Afghanistan is concerned, that was already established American policy. Trump
Yeah,
had entered into an agreement. What we are discussing here is the mode of withdrawal. He had given himself time up to September 11th. I mean, the very date because of which 20 years earlier the conflict had begun.
yeah.
What was the need to rush the withdrawal and finish it all by July when you had so many months available? Why could you not have managed the evacuation of your own citizens and your supporters by taking control of Kabul airport? Why did you have to hand over Kabul airport to the Taliban when you knew nothing about their policy? That is why we call it a disaster. That there was no foresight. Why this mad rush to get out? And I have had a larger criticism continuously about American policy in Afghanistan, a complete absence of management of Pakistan. I
Hmm.
mean, Pakistan was supposed to be your ally from 2002 Pakistan was supporting the revival of the Taliban, 2002. And you tell me you spent $2 trillion in Afghanistan and you have nothing to show for your 20 years there.
Hmm. But that's a long-standing American dysfunctionality vis-a-vis Pakistan. When you call Joe Biden a full-time disaster zone, insipid and shaky, in the context of this ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, why do you use those words? There are people in India who believe
Yeah,
that India
I
has not
believe
chosen correctly to abstain. Where do you come in on
absolutely.
that
I'm one
debate?
of those. I'm one of those.
Okay,
You see,
why?
the United States is an inherently dysfunctional state. And
Hmm.
today it is so deeply polarized, you cannot get consensus on any issue whatsoever. The
Hmm.
second point, it is very deeply influenced by domestic lobbies and interest groups. Number three, you also know that they are wedded to the military and industrial complex. Sale of weaponry is central to American policy, regardless of who is sitting in the White House. For all these reasons, the United States does not have a long term vision with regard to any policy. It cannot be a partner for any other country except for itself. It has the vagaries of domestic politics constantly influencing their own approach. And you can see how dysfunctional is it.
But what,
It is
but
as
what does
I
that
speak
mean
to it.
for us? But what does that mean for us as a
Yeah.
nation?
So
Do you
India,
believe, let me just ask, do you believe we have been right in abstaining repeatedly at the United Nations?
absolutely. We are today recovering lost ground. The disaster, the mistakes that we made by going into the American embrace. And I would suggest that possibly in panic, when you have a problem with regard to China, you don't rush into the American embrace because the Americans can do nothing for you. If you have a problem with China, you have to manage that problem bilaterally and directly. If you want to involve a few friends like Russia, well and good. You have the platform of the RIC, but you
But what have the
cannot.
Russians done? What have the Russians done for us?
Oh, you don't know. They are doing many. Firstly, they have kept the weapons line open. They
Hmm.
are the ones who are in constant dialogue with the Chinese and the Indians. They want us to get together as far as RIC is concerned. There are things that are happening behind the scenes, I would imagine, that we don't know all about. And I think Ukraine is going to expedite, this is my personal view, Ukraine is likely to expedite a certain forward movement, even with regard to Ladakh. But what the mistake, the core mistake we had made, and which is what has led to all these problems, is that we wedded ourselves to the Americans strategically, security wise, defense wise, weapons wise. We were doing many more exercises with them than with all the other countries combined.
Hmm.
We were sharing intelligence with them. We had interoperability with them. If you were sitting in Beijing, what would be the messages you would be reading? And then we went and upped the quad from joint secretary to minister at a time when Trump was in the White House, and that was a chaotic
I, I was
administration.
going to ask you about the Quad. Your book refers to two Quads: the Quad, which is, of course, America, Japan, Australia, and India, and Quad 2, as it's been dubbed, which is, of course, this very intriguing sort of
Yeah.
West Asia troika, as it were. And I'll let you speak about both. But let's first talk about the main Quad, which came together
There
to
is no
stop.
now no quad at all.
What do you
Let's
mean
be
there's no
very clear.
Quad? What do you mean
When
there's no
we
Quad?
entered quad, when we
Hmm.
entered quad, we were looking at it as a security platform, a platform, which is why we crossed the Malacca Strait and went to South China Sea, believing we were delusional here. We believed that Russia, that China, that the United States would now be our security partner and would robustly support us vis-a-vis China. Today we've completed 2 years of the Ladakh standoff. Where are the Americans? What has Quad done for us? What did the Americans do during this period? In the month of August last year, they then put into place the AUKUS. Australia,
Hmm.
United States, and UK. That's the security alliance. They also have separate arrangements with the Japanese security arrangements, not with India of the same caliber and the same level. What did the summit finally agree about Quad 1? Vaccine
Hmm.
cooperation, technology cooperation, and climate change cooperation. Is this what Quad was supposed to be? We've got many more platforms for this, don't we? Now, Quad
Mhm.
2. Quad 2 was, to my mind, a farce. And it would have been a tragedy if it was not a comedy. Quad 2. Our minister goes on a bilateral visit to Israel. He's sitting comfortably there talking to his interlocutor. The foreign ministers of UAE, Israel, and the United States have had a separate meeting earlier in Washington a week earlier. While he's sitting there in Tel Aviv, he is told, let's have a quad, we could then have a quadrilateral meeting, a chat online, and let's call it Quad. They call it Quad. Quad
Mhm.
is this kind of throwing of words is nonsensical. You should take all engagement seriously. Only then will you be taken seriously. That you don't just create a quad on the spur of the moment and pretend that it means anything. What is this quad supposed to do? We already have very substantial ties with the UAE and with Israel and with the United States. That's it. If you want to
Mhm.
have certain shared projects together, nothing stops you. You don't need to call it quad. You can do any
And
project you want that's going to be
and you're
done.
and you're arguing that the Quad One, which is the Americans, Australia, Japan, and India, is now a non-starter after the
It's
Russian
now
war.
gone. It's now gone. If there is to be a serious engagement which needs to be thought through, it is with Australia and Japan, right? Neither of them is a serious player in the Indian Ocean. What is India's crucial space, which is very important for India? The Western Indian Ocean, particularly the Arabian Sea. You don't see Japan and Australia roaming around there. It reaffirms to me that India is the best guardian of its own interests. Build up relationships with the region, build up relationships as far as Iran is concerned. We've ignored Iran consistently. We had also downgraded our ties with the Russians. All of these are today being corrected. We are seeing the first hints of a certain course correction which might take us up.
That is so intriguing because the biggest compliment that India has received for its response to Russia is that it's realpolitik. You're actually calling it a course correction. Let me ask you, what of the fact that it is a naked act of aggression, that there are children lying under the debris of those bombs in Ukraine, that civilians are being attacked, that it is not exactly a just war. I'm not saying the American invasion of Iraq was or the American invasion of Afghanistan was, but what about the principle? What about the principle where India should
No,
stand?
no war is a just war. Wars are fought by countries in support of what they think are their interests. In the case of the United States, you have to truly struggle to understand what the American assaults were all about. They attacked Afghanistan because they said Osama bin Laden carried out 9/11. They did carpet bombing of Afghanistan and killed 40,000 Afghans. Then they
Hmm.
attacked Iraq, and no one is ever able to recall what Iraq had done in regard to 9/11. They lied and they lied and they lied, and they killed 100,000 Iraqis on day one in carpet bombing, and a million and odd Iraqis were killed because of the 1 year occupation. And look at the disaster zone they have left behind. I argue to you, the Americans always think in terms of military action when there are serious political issues facing them. And they
Mhm.
then destroy that country, that civilization, that state order. And then they pack and run. And that's what they do. They've done it consistently, everything, every time. Whether it is Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya, look at the disasters they've left behind. Millions of people dead, millions and several societies completely shattered. It takes decades to put them together.
Hmm.
Iraq is still struggling. And that is
Fa-
now the United, as far as Russia is concerned, it is very clear Putin is giving the message end this business of Cold War. You cannot consistently. I would like to ask my American friends, why are you placing missiles in all the border areas and facing Moscow and various other Russian targets? Is this the Cold War that you are actually putting in place a Cold War where it didn't exist? Just
uh,
as the Americans made Iraq a bastion of extremism where extremism had not existed earlier.
Let me ask you this, Ambassador, in the end. From an Indian perspective, what about the dangers of a Russia China nexus? We've seen the Putin Xi Jinping meeting. We've seen the Chinese foreign minister suddenly in Delhi, where the foreign minister says this is not a normal relationship, it's a work in progress. You say the Americans have done nothing for our interests vis-a-vis China. That's what the Quad was formed for, to contain China. What about the dangers of a Russia China
I
nexus?
don't think there is a Russia China nexus of the kind that should frighten us. We are part of that nexus. Recall the RIC, recall BRICS, recall FCO. We are an integral part of this arrangement. We opted out. It is not that they pushed us out. We opted out, joined the Quad, became part of an alternative nexus, and then now, of course, that nexus no longer matters to the other partners. We are doing course correction very rapidly, and I hope in time successfully, correcting the mistakes that were done from 2019 onward when we upgraded
But
code.
but
Why was it?
I have to argue with you on one point. You spoke about the
Yeah.
Americans and the dysfunctionality vis-a-vis Pakistan. China has repeatedly blocked Indian resolutions at the UN on Pakistan. Pakistan is like a vassal state of China. Why do you see our future in this nexus of Russia and China?
See, there are no good guys and bad guys in world affairs. You know this better than any one of us. They are all countries pursuing interests, but interests not defined spontaneously, not defined as a basis of domestic lobbies, defined in terms of a long-term vision. Where do I want to go? How do I want to reach there? What are the resources that I will garner? I want to remind you of a scenario that prevailed just a few years earlier. China, India, Russia, Iran, all of us were part of the same coalition seeking a new world order that was multipolar. Who abandoned that vision? We did, in pursuit of this alternative arrangement, which has pushed us out recently, and now we are going back to I hope we go back to the old arrangement. That arrangement is there. I always would suggest to you, be part of a larger coalition that moderates the impulses of other individual partners. I think RIC is the best platform that is available. We will be significant role player. We will be welcomed by the Russians, and we will be accommodated by the Chinese.
Very interesting and very provocative. Really, one thing we can agree on, that the world as we know it is certainly not the same and is not going to be the same. And India is going to have to walk many a tightrope to find its place. Thank you, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. Ambassador Ahmad's new book, let me leave you with that image. His new book, A West Asia at War by Talmiz Ahmad, is now out. And it has a full chapter on that Biden presidency that he just described as a full disaster zone. Thank you very much. If we can come out of that now. Thank you very much, Ambassador. See you soon.
Thank you.
Pleasure talking
Thank
to
you,
you. Lots to
Barkha.
think about.
I wish
Thank
you
you.
all
Take
the
care.
best.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.